World War II. Sirens sound the alert. German bombers will pound another British city tonight. During the Blitz, the two most important economists of the age shared air warden duty on the roof of King's College. An English gentleman and an Austrian exile, personal friends, but intellectual rivals. How their battle of ideas still shapes our life and society is our story. John Maynard Keynes helped the Allied governments defend freedom by planning their wartime economies. Friedrich von Hayek thought government interference in the economy was a threat to freedom.
The debate over market forces, whether you have an economy that's based upon prices or state planning, has been at the very heart of the economic battles of the last 100 years. For decades, the ideas of John Maynard Keynes dominated the economies of the Western world.
Keynes felt that the market economy would go to excesses, and when things were in difficulty, the market wouldn't work. Therefore, the government had to step in. Hayek felt that the market would eventually take care of itself.
It was only when Hayek was a very old man that his ideas began to prevail and the world began to change.
World War I destroyed 20 million lives. It laid a whole continent to waste. There was blood and carnage amidst the beauty of the Italian Alps, where the armies of Austria and Italy were fighting. Friedrich von Hayek served in the Austrian artillery. He was only 17 years old, still a schoolboy. The fighting was ferocious. He experienced retreat and defeat.
The decisive influence was really World War I. It's bound to draw your attention to the problems of political organization.
He vowed to work for a better world.
The First World War was a cataclysm. People were disillusioned, people were bitter, they were looking for something better. Socialism, communism seemed to promise that better world.
By overthrowing the old order, the Russian Revolution aimed to deliver that better world. Inspired by the economic theories of Karl Marx, the Bolsheviks sought to smash capitalism. Lenin, the revolution's leader, urged the workers of the world to unite against the global economy. The revolution made trade, commerce, and private property criminal acts. Lenin promised to end the economic exploitation of man by man. The man who was destined to be Hayek's great intellectual rival was a brilliant young academic at Cambridge University. But John Maynard Keynes was much more than that. He befriended writers and artists. One painted these murals for him. He was also a familiar figure in the city of London, where he made a fortune in the stock market, lost it all, and made it back again. Familiar with politicians and prime ministers, Keynes spent the First World War advising the British government on how to organize its wartime economy. At the end of the war, Keynes joined the British peace delegation at Versailles in France. The victorious Allies wanted defeated Germany to pay the costs of the war through what were called reparations.
All the statesmen at Versailles could think about was how to squeeze money out of an already bankrupt Germany.
Keynes felt that the reparations were out of all proportion to what an economy could really take and would have very destructive social and political and economic consequences.
Angry and disgusted, Keynes resigned. Back in England, he went to stay with his friend, the painter Duncan Grant. That summer, Grant painted Keynes, writing his prophetic book, The Economic Consequences of the Peace.
If we take the view that Germany must be kept impoverished and her children starved and crippled, vengeance, I dare predict, will not limp. Nothing can delay that final war that will destroy the civilization and progress of our generation.
Austria had lost the war and its empire. Vienna was a cold and hungry city. Revolution was in the air. Socialists and communists were winning the battle for hearts and minds. Young and idealistic, Friedrich von Hayek enrolled at the University of Vienna.
It was during the war that I more or less decided to do economics. I really got hooked.
Socialism seemed to promise a more just society. Albert Slavinger, a former pupil and disciple of Hayek.
He openly said that he, at one time, was a socialist of the mild sort, where concerns for the poor and concerns for fairness and equity would help to determine government policy.
Much of Vienna's intellectual life took place outside the university, in the coffee houses across the Ringstrasse. There were informal seminars for those who loved discussion and argument. Hayek joined the circle of a passionate libertarian called Ludwig von Mises. Von Mises believed markets, like people, needed to be free from government meddling.
Ludwig von Mises was the preeminent economist of the Austrian school. The distinguishing hallmark of the Austrian school of economic thought is that markets work and governments don't.
Von Mises predicted that the new Soviet socialist economy would never work, precisely because the government controlled wages and prices.
What von Mises said is that the great flaw of socialism is that it doesn't have a functioning price system to send all the signals to consumers and producers as to what something is worth. That these prices are at the very heart of what makes a functioning economy work. You can think of them as traffic signals. And if you don't have them, what you get is a system that doesn't work, or you get chaos.
Von Mises argued that free markets do it best. Why fool with anything else?
In Soviet Russia, it seemed as if von Mises' predictions were coming true. Lenin had abolished what he saw as the chaos of free markets. The state controlled the economy. Wages and prices were fixed. But the great Marxist experiment was in trouble. Lenin had an economic disaster on his hands. Soviet Russia was a grim place, haunted by cold, famine, hunger, and death.
Lenin knew that he needed a different kind of policy, and he instituted what became known as the New Economic Policy. Lenin says farmers can sell their own goods and own their own land. He says that small businesses can operate, and you start to get an economic revival. Well, his comrades on the left attacked him viciously for selling out the principles of Bolshevikism and Marxism. And Lenin, who by this time had already had a stroke, was not well, nevertheless pulled himself up on the platform for one of the very last times in his life. And he was still the old Lenin. He was vitriolic, he was sarcastic. His critics, he said, were fools, were stupid, because the state, the government, the Bolsheviks, would control the overall economy. Steel, railroads, coal, the heavy industries, what he called the commanding heights of the economy.
Within a year, Lenin was dead. The mourners at Lenin's funeral believed that history was on their side. And in less than 30 years, not only Russia, but Eastern Europe, China, more than a third of humanity would be living according to the economic tenets of Marxist-Leninism. Lenin's successor would tighten the Communist Party's iron grip on the commanding heights of the economy. Joseph Stalin introduced central planning. Under him, the Communist Party planned and managed every aspect of the economy. While communism seemed to be forging ahead, capitalism looked to be doomed. Germany and Austria were living with the economic consequences of the peace. Forced to pay unbearable war reparations, the defeated governments simply printed more money. The result? Inflation. More inflation. Hyperinflation. It took a basket full of paper money to go shopping.
You saw people carrying their money on wheels because you had to pay for a piece of bread billions of Reichsmark.
Hayek, who was working at a statistical research institute, needed 200 pay raises in 8 months. Money was cheaper than wallpaper. Million-mark notes lit stoves. Shoes that cost 12 marks in 1913 sold for 32 trillion marks in 1923. In Hitler's favorite beer cellar, a glass of beer cost 1 billion marks. Hyperinflation wiped out the savings of the middle class.
And that was one of the reasons for the success of the Nazis, of Hitler. They got support from these people who lost their fortunes.
Hayek would always see inflation as an evil that corroded society and undermined democracy. The fight against inflation became a cornerstone of his economic philosophy.